Good afternoon, colleague. 12:15, and we're back in session. And I'll turn to our superintendent for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I'm really excited to be delivering this report to you, and would just like to preface my presentation with a couple of thoughts that have been guiding my work around what I'm about to share. Yesterday at the board meeting, excuse me, I shared that education is an essential part of achieving the American dream, but that I believe that we're not providing a sound basic education for all students. And I want to just take a second to expand on that statement. Education is still the surest pathway to opportunity in this country. But our workforce looks wildly different today than it did 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 20 years ago. I was struck by a phrase that Dr. Tomberlin used this morning. He said, he talked about teachers growing and progressing academically. And I always think about what it means for our students to grow and progress academically, because it looks very different today. Success looks very different today than it did even 20 years ago. And unfortunately, we have districts that boast an 80% high school graduation rate, but only a quarter or a fifth of those children meet the minimum admission requirements to go to a UNC system school or meet ACT college readiness benchmarks. We have a diploma integrity issue in our state that we do need to solve for. I also believe that these challenges cannot be solved with money alone. This is not a new or an original idea. The Leandro case points this out, or sorry, the Wested report points this out. And the data is clear that in states that tend to spend 3 times what North Carolina spends on per pupil expenditures, those states tend to have the worst achievement gap in our country. However, here are some things that we do know that our data show when it comes to the inequities that we have in our state. So we know that high poverty schools have a disproportionate number of new teachers who are less experienced, that our new teachers leave at faster rates than our more experienced teachers, that we have more principal turnover in our low-income schools, that we have districts where truly there is a warm body sitting in the classroom, just making sure that kids are safe, physically safe. And if you have ever had the misfortune to observe one of those classes, as I have as a turnaround coach, it is gut-wrenching to see students sitting there looking at that warm body, expecting for something to happen. Only 30% of students right now in our state have a fully licensed math teacher. Our shortages are specific to high needs areas like science, especially secondary science, and exceptional children, as well as school support personnel. These are challenges that money will help us solve. But we have to be innovative as well, which is why I'm so excited about the work of the Human Capital Roundtable. But we're on our 3rd generation of school effectiveness studies in the US right now. And what these studies show is that it's not the curriculum, it's not the way the desks are arranged, it's not the layout of the building, it's not even parent involvement that shows the greatest path forward for our students and our ability to improve outcomes. It's the teacher. And right now, we do not have highly qualified teachers in every classroom across our state. And this is why all students having a highly qualified teacher and an excellent teacher in our state is my North Star and that of my team at DPI. And I would argue the state board. So how do we achieve our North Star? We are truly at an incredible time in education right now. There are three forces at play here that are working in concert to provide opportunities that we need for change. The first one is the Wested report and the court's mandate that all children are entitled to a sound basic education. And at the agency, this has, in the past year, and will continue to take the form of district and school transformation. I want us to reinvigorate this DST team under the direction of Dr. Bev Emery, and want to, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail in a minute, but want to build up this team so that they can support districts in ways that districts haven't been supported for at least the last 10 years. The second thing that's happening right now is we're starting a long session where there is incredible appetite for change and policy recommendations and new budget priorities, old budget priorities. We're working with the Senate right now to make carry on with some improvements and really solidify some improvements to the Read to Achieve legislation. And then finally, we have COVID learning loss recovery. We have a moral imperative to ensure that ESSER II funding, $1.6 billion coming to our state for K-12 schools, will do everything that it can do to ensure that students recover both mentally and academically from this pandemic. I am really happy to share with you this morning that Dr. Michael Marr, who is a co-chair of Pepsi, will be joining DPI as the executive director of learning loss recovery. And he will be working in tandem with Dr. Emery, as well as with across the agency and cross-functional teams to support our districts as they seek avenues and opportunities to help their children recover from the learning loss. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of three guiding priorities. Sort of what I think of as if everything needs to flow up under this North Star of students having a highly qualified, excellent teacher in every classroom, then what are those three major buckets that are going to that we're going to use in order to enact district school transformation goals, long session goals, and COVID recovery goals. And the first one is something that we've heard a lot about since last summer, and that's literacy. We need to shift from a one-by-one approach to supporting struggling students, which is what we've always done, to what we're seeing happen around the country. And in particular, Mississippi led the way and was the only state to see gains in reading across all subgroups. And that is, we need a systemic plan for training teachers in the body of research known as the science of reading. Number two, testing and accountability. So there are two pieces to this. We need to reform our school accountability model, our state school accountability model, to reflect all the different ways that schools are working to transform teaching and learning. And we also need to think about the way we assess kids, the way we test. That there's been a lot of testing reduction in the last couple of years, but we are still giving end of grade tests that are providing a snapshot in time that the results of which do not define a child, do not define a teacher, and do nothing to help parents understand where their children are in their academic development. And then third, something we've heard a lot about as well, and that is we have a human capital challenge to solve for in our state. We need to develop a strategy around human capital that will create the pipeline we need of highly qualified teachers who are supported by excellent principals. And part of ensuring that we have those excellent teachers and we have those excellent principals is making sure that we have school support personnel in every district doing the work that they are best prepared to do, so that teachers are not giving shots, are not having to worry about where a child's going to sleep at night. So that our teachers can have high expectations of kids. It's very difficult. You know, we all know, teachers know that they need to have high expectations of kids, but when you're trying to figure out how a child's going to eat and sleep safely for the night, it is hard to have high expectations for your students academically. So I'll just close by sharing some specific examples of our priorities aligning with the board's expanded budget requests. So for literacy, we are going to be looking at what a system-wide training for all teachers pre-K through 5 initially will look like in our state. We, again, will be reinvigorating the district and regional support team, which will include all aspects of teaching and learning, not just literacy. But this model, which has just been so effective throughout COVID, will be highly leveraged to support individual district needs. Again, it's about making sure that resources are matched in the most specific way possible for that district's needs. And then the idea of a statewide literacy campaign is honestly modeled after what Mississippi did. And this is, you know, people in education get accused all the time of working in silos. And we cannot be working in silos when it comes to tackling this literacy challenge. And so right now, we've got work that's going on in pre-K around the science of reading and literacy. Certainly the work from the summer of the board's literacy task force, which culminated in specific recommendations and is ongoing, as we saw in the presentation yesterday from Amy Ryan. There's a pilot going on with the UNC system that will work with our College of Education professors and teachers, currently serving teachers, on training both our EPPs and our teachers in the science of reading. So we all need to get on the same page. And we're working to, excuse me, to make that happen. And we are all going to be in the same boat, rowing in the same direction on this. Human capital. We saw today just the incredible efforts of that group shown in those graphics. And there is no reason that we cannot become #1 in the Southeast for teacher pay. But more importantly, all of the benefits of the 4 pieces of that licensure work are really represent what the innovation that has to occur when we talk about the way we compensate teachers, the way we present the total compensation package for an educator in our state, and the way we appeal to this generation of college graduates. We do have work to do on our student support services personnel ratios. And one group in particular that we will focus on in light of COVID are school psychologists. And there's 2 reasons for this. School psychologists are key to ensuring that our exceptional children are A, correctly identified, and B, the services that are going to be provided to them match that child's needs. There are legal requirements involved with this. There's a process with testing that needs to be involved in this. And too often, when we don't have enough school psychologists, the result is that kids are misdiagnosed. They are over-identified. And I'm sad to say that over-identification impacts low income and students of color most of all, because it's not that these children have a learning disability, it's that they just haven't learned to read yet, which is not the same thing. Our school psychologists also have the mental first aid training that many of our students are going to need as they return to the classroom. So we need and too often, if you talk to school psychologists, as my team and I have, as well as the board, when you talk to these folks, what they'll tell you is that because of the legal requirements around the EC work that they do, they are often trying to just be compliant and not get to all of the work that they need to do. So we can remedy that, but we need to create we can't just appropriate money and expect school psychologists to show up. We need to create a pipeline of these professionals. I'm also advocating for instructional and non-certified support bonuses for our teachers, our principals, and all of our non-certified staff, our incredible teacher assistants, our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers, our custodial staff. These folks have had to become jacks of all trades throughout the pandemic, and certainly deserve the extra financial pat on the back that these bonuses will provide. I've spoken already about testing and accountability, and you'll hear in more detail during the presentation to the board about the school business systems modernization and from Vice Chair Duncan. I want to remind everyone that that was fully funded in 2018 and has been the victim of the budget stalemate. And so just keep that in the back of your mind as you're hearing presentations about that. Competency-based education is something that is special to me because I spent the last 3 years leading the only 100% competency-based university in the country. And I know firsthand the power that competency-based education holds to in allowing adults to complete their education. And I also know the power that it holds for our K through 12 students in serving the whole child. And I look forward to sharing more about what I mean by that in the coming months. And then, of course, we need to re-envision our school accountability model. We need to specifically, what I will tell you is that we need to have a multiple measures approach to what that externally facing scorecard looks like. It needs to be parent focused rather than something that is used to place blame or point fingers or make judgment calls about what a school is or isn't doing. Yes, achievement needs to be indicated on there. Yes, growth needs to be prioritized more than achievement. But there are other things that need to be taken into account when we're discussing how we evaluate schools. Things like student surveys, parent surveys, teacher satisfaction surveys, and absenteeism rates, opportunities for students to grow in other ways than just academics. There are all kinds of ways that we can help parents understand what is going on at their child's school. So I will stop there, and I believe that I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Duncan. Oh, sorry. Chair Davis.
Thanks, Superintendent Truitt. Any questions or comments from our colleagues on the superintendent's report? Hearing none, we'll move to the BizOp committee, chaired by Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I hope everyone can hear me. We have a number of items in the BizOp committee meeting today, which I'm fortunate enough to lead along with Todd Chastain, and we look forward to sharing these items with you today. In light of the presentation just made by our superintendent, I think it's with the chair's permission, we're going to skip ahead to BizOp 6 as our first item. Is that all right, Chair Davis? Thank you. And BizOp 6 is our legislative and budget priorities. It just makes sense to go in that order, I think, while we're already have our minds set on these important issues. As each of you know, the board has worked on this budget proposal for probably at least 4 months now, perhaps a little longer than that. And that comes on the heels of the work that's been done on the strategic plan to set our priorities, and then further refinement of our priorities during the course of the past year with the COVID-19 implications that we've dealt with, and the additional funding that's been there to try to help with the pandemic, the damages, if you will, that the pandemic has been doing to our schools and our students. So at this point, we had come together with our key priorities, and at that, Superintendent Truitt and her team came into office and appropriately wanted to have their hand in the budget so that we can discuss what makes sense and how that aligns with what the board strategic priorities have been in terms of the budget. And they align extremely well, as you can already tell from the presentation that the superintendent just made. So we have taken the board items and They have been refined further by the superintendent and her team, and in some respects to put more detail, if you will, on some of the items that we've had on there as important strategic plans, but now they're more directed and detailed in terms of exactly how to go about it. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of where we are, and then the detail overview will come from Freeburg McKinney and Jamie Falkenberry, both of whom have been extremely involved in this budget process, and I think I look forward to hearing from both of them in light of the work that they've been doing on this. And welcome Jamie formally, I guess, because I think this may be his first presentation to the board, but if it's not, it's his first really big presentation to the board because our budget item is obviously a very big one, so we're glad you're here. As you do a quick overview, our buckets, if you will, I think it was referred to that in several of our discussions. Two of our buckets were addressing statewide learning challenges and recovery and student well-being and school safety. This budget proposes approximately $87 million in recurring funds for those two buckets. These funds ultimately will become what I think of as the backbone or the framework, if you will, of how we go about learning recovery and for our students and this well-being of our students, which has been damaged by all reports and all studies through the course of the pandemic. We need to do work there. And for our students to truly meet their statewide learning challenges and recovery, they won't get there if we don't also help them with well-being and school safety. These two things go hand in hand, and these really are a backbone of our recovery. These items are here not for all the work that can be done on the recovery. It's important to just pause for a moment and realize that the ESSER II funds, which we're also going to discuss this afternoon, are going to provide a very important part of actually getting that work done as we go forward for dealing with our learning challenges, dealing with our student well-being, dealing with our school safety issues. But these will put the framework in place in order to implement appropriately under the direction of the superintendent and with the policy guidance of the board, how in fact we get our students back where we want them to be so desperately as quickly as we can get our students back in the place we want them to be. And so we look forward to having a discussion on these items. And they are, I think, in line with what both the board has suggested and in line with the superintendent has come forward with. We also have, one of our buckets has been an education workforce development plan and greater CTE opportunities in our schools. And I view those in some respects as a continuum. That is, we want CTE opportunities for our students as early as middle school to start becoming engaged. And we also want education workforce development plans very strongly in our high schools and earlier. So these are two important buckets to the board, and you will see that they're an important part of the budget proposal. There's $20 million between those two items that are put out in new requests, consistent with what both the board's ideas have been and also consistent with the superintendent's vision and plan. These are important items. The business modernization plan was referred to and in some respects already covered in terms of how we got to where we are by Superintendent Truitt in her presentation. But we have a total of $66 million in that item, but it's important to break that down, I believe. 29 million of those dollars approximately are non-recurring items. The other remaining $37 million are recurring items. And not endlessly recurring, but recurring until we can get the business modernization plan implemented and put in place, which will take us some additional years. You'll recall we were about 1 year in of a 5-year plan when we got interrupted. So we still have multiple years in order to get this put in place. As many of you know, and as many of you heard from areas that you represent, the interruption of this plan has caused districts to get in a situation where they have antiquated systems, literally 30 years old in many instances. And the former providers, realizing that they might not be continuing to provide these services, in the interim have raised the costs for these already antiquated systems by multiples in some instances of what they have been before. So it's really put the districts in a bad situation, both from the standpoint of the information that they've been able to generate and use, the upkeep at this point, which is getting more and more difficult, and the increased cost for a system that doesn't provide all that they need. So business modernization in this regard will end up helping us to save some money long term, will allow us to provide reports instantaneously in some instances and much more quickly in every instance to the legislature and others when asked. And so it is an important component of our overall work to serve our children and to serve proper analysis of how to provide best practices as we move forward. So that's another important need. We also have some other agency requests, and I'll just highlight a couple of them because we've talked about them. The federal E-rate program is a $5 million request, which is about half of the other agency requests. That's a program we've had in place. We've had a recent presentation on the E-rate program. It saves about 3 times what we pay for it on an annual basis. So this is something we absolutely want to continue to have in place. And so it's an important part of our budget in that regard. It's not just, yes, it costs something, but it pays itself back more than enough and then some more. Then there are 2 or 3 specific items we're mandated by the legislature to do. And as Superintendent Truitt continues to complete the staffing model that fits with her vision, we have some requests for ongoing FTEs, and we're going to have a more detailed report about that at our next meeting and at our upcoming meeting. There already have been a number of things done to fill positions and to reallocate, in some instances, positions. That will continue to set up an operation that fulfills and implements the vision in a way that it's done with fidelity as we move forward. So those are, a broad highlight. I also should say that we don't have teacher salaries increases or bonuses or our classified employee salaries, teachers or bonuses in here. This board has historically supported a rise to the #1 in the Southeast category, and certainly supports bonuses given some of the extraordinary work that's been done, not just by our educators in the last year, but please all recall many of our classified employees went out to make sure our children got fed and went to extraordinary lengths for months to make sure our children were being fed, did so at some personal risk in many instances, and did so without complaint in a way that served our state where we most need to. For those who have the least, we owe the most, and that is in fact our children. And many of them would not have been in anywhere near the place from a health standpoint that they are had it not been for the work of these classified employees. So we need to honor and respect all of that. So we fully are supportive of whatever bonus considerations are put forward with respect to the work that's going on. So with that backdrop, let me ask Mr. McKinney and Ms. Falkenberry to come forward and to lead us through the discussion of the budget and the excellent PowerPoint they've prepared.
Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Vice Chair Duncan, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, board members and advisors, our colleagues here at DPI and the board, and all those across this great state who are committed and dedicated to serving the students of North Carolina Public Schools. I'm joined today by my colleague and co-director, Jamie Falkenberry, and we are thrilled to present to you the collective 10-month journey of collaboration, consideration, alignment, and partnership. Over the last 2 years, prior to the June 4th submission and State Board of Education approved expanded budget requests, you all have established your strategic plan, grounded in equity and whole child, and upholding your mission and constitutional authority to guard and maintain the right of a sound basic education. For each and every student in North Carolina Public Schools, this holds true. And we hope that you will see these long-term strategies as aligned to your vision and to your continued support of these budget requests. We also see these aligned to Superintendent Truitt and her leadership team's North Star and priorities supporting state, regional, and district transformation by developing the strategies of increased literacy, human capital, both in recruitment and retention, and reforming test accountability models, As you can see, and hopefully we will be able to weave and synthesize the State Board Strategic Plan goals 1, 2, and 3, as well as the strategic plan action items 1 through 8. And as BizOp Chair Duncan expressed, an increasing need for support positions on number 8. As you just heard from Superintendent Truitt and her North Star, Mr. Falconberry and I will also do our best to weave together the literacy, testing, accountability, and human capital priorities of her leadership team moving forward and synthesizing with the work of the board and the strategic plan. We will start with the main slides, which shows each of, as BizOp Chair Duncan referred to as buckets. And I think it is very important to reiterate what BizOp Chair Duncan mentioned as this statewide commitment and the need for recurring funding to support districts from, as has been identified by several district superintendents, as the funding cliff. This also supports the Leandro priorities and reflects a dedication to the priorities of Superintendent Truitt and the strategic plan. So as the $1.6 billion that is coming in ESSER 2 fundings to our district and the 10% holdback from the department and the board, we'd like to establish these as long-term COVID-19 transition and recovery strategies that will require extended budget from the GA. The first is addressing statewide learning challenges and recovery. These support strategic plan items 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7, and all 3 of Superintendent Truitt's priorities, and stands totaling at $31,705,000. The second, student mental health, well-being, and school safety, support strategic plan action items 1, 4, 5, and 6, and all 3 of Superintendent Truitt's action items. The third bucket, education workforce development, teacher and principal recruitment and retention, stands at $7,478,700. These support 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7 of the strategic plan items, and all 3 of Superintendent Truitt's priorities. And connecting middle high school students to post-secondary and career opportunities at $12,854,500, supporting strategic plan action items 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and all 3 of Superintendent Truitt's priorities. Lastly, the school system's business modernization, as described by BizOp Chair Duncan, with non-recurring at $28,900,000 and recurring at $37,355,000. So as you can see here, the total for a long-term strategy and statewide commitment to these following priorities stands at just over $184 million. There is also the $10,450,000 for other department requests, which we are not going to go into detail at this point, as we can provide that information at another time. We wanted to keep this focused on these 5 main buckets.
Thanks, Freebird, for setting everything up. This is Jamie Falconberry. Thank you, Chairman Davis and Vice Chair Duncan, for all your leadership prior to us getting here and laying the foundation. Freebird and your team really helped make this an easy transition. What I'm going to do today is we're going to bounce back and forth between Freebird and I, and that I'm going to kind of focus on what maybe the new items are, or if they're recategorized, and how that fits into what Superintendent's vision is, and how it aligns with the State Board. So on this first item, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the importance of the science of reading budget requests, because the board had a very thorough presentation and conversation yesterday during a separate committee report, as well as just by Superintendent in her report. But I quickly want to re-highlight on the importance of changing the way we teach our children. Even before this pandemic hit, we knew that our students were struggling in reading and literacy. NAEP had North Carolina 4th graders at 36% proficiency for reading scores. Less than 1 in 5 of our high school students were passing all 4 benchmarks of the ACT. As the superintendent and the chairman echoed yesterday, literacy and reading are the foundation for success in every other subject. Knowing of these statistics and the importance of having a solid foundation in reading and literacy, Superintendent Truitt is setting a clear vision and audacious direction for our our state to fundamentally change the way our students learn how to read. Now, for the next two items, we can anticipate that there will be learning loss for many of our students because of remote learning. While this reality will present challenges for our teachers to get students back on the right trajectory, it does give us the opportunity to finally allow for a true competency-based, some people call it mastery-based, model in our classrooms. As many in this department have said, we will need to reimagine the classroom for the foreseeable future. There are platforms that Superintendent Truitt and our team are exploring and are very excited about the prospects of delivering a high-quality competency-based model in the near future. These two specific budget requests are for the ongoing funds that are necessary to keep a competency-based platform up and running after we hopefully utilize ESSER II funds to set up the initial cost of a platform and professional development around it. And I'll pass it back over to Freebird.
The next item we would like to discuss is school and district support. This was reiterated once again in Superintendent Truitt's words. And how do we achieve that North Star? How do we develop a strategic plan that echoes Leandro priorities and really looks at school and district assistance and turnaround? So as you may recall, this is actually two numbers that we broke up from a previous budget request, which was a 9.5 request for this specific item. And what we're echoing here is the rebuilding of the district and regional support for teachers and for principals here. So these two numbers show that support for both of these different sectors, and really is continuing the efforts of the CARES 10% funding of 4.5 that was established earlier by the board to lead district and school transformation and to provide regional and statewide system of support, both in FTEs and in resources. Again, this would be directed by Dr. Bev Emery and her team. And we really feel like this is, again, one of those long-term strategies that we want to make sure that we're building on so that that funding cliff doesn't exist when districts begin to build out their capacity and then that funding ends from the federal allocation. Another one in addressing statewide learning challenges is we've seen a lot with driver's education. So we wanted to make sure that we brought this to everybody's attention. And if you're a parent out there who has a driving or at least a learning to drive age student, then you can understand the excitement, the anticipation that they have right there in one of those lifelong goals and really benchmarks in our teenagers' lives. So there is an immediate ask here for non-refunding support to really kickstart this program off this spring. That's a $75,000 ask. And then again, a more strategic support for additional existing administrative budget in both curriculum and technology and regional support projects. So both of these are actually recurring to really amp up the current driving education system and move on from 2021 into 2022 so that we can begin to address the backlog. The next slide is simply looking at some of the other considerations that we wanted to bring to the board's attention. There are ongoing discussions, many conversations and considerations in regard to how are we going to evaluate reading and math levels, both as we end the 2021 school year and then also bridge to 21-22. Looking at state-supported summer learning programs, again, to provide added and necessary positioning, compensation, and resources as we move into the 21-22 school year. The potential for extended learning time programs, school accountability and teacher effectiveness models, which again, we just saw the presentation from the Human Capital Roundtable today, and also continuing board discussions from prior to COVID from the February 2020 board meeting, where we really began to dive into other states and their accountability models and how could we then use those in ongoing ways to reform North Carolina's. An issue that's been discussed a great deal by our superintendents and many across the state is how to address graduation. So looking at alternative graduation pathways, end of year grading, and also testing accountability at the end of the 2021 school year. grade promotion, and this could be all in a multi-age classroom model in K through 2, or it could also be as we move into middle school and high school. How is the state going to look at a grade promotion ending this year and beginning the next year? And then the projected 16 to 17,000 new kindergartners and a 21-22 ADM projection. So we wanted to bring up these specific ideas that may require further attention and further funding requests to address as we move forward.
Student mental health and well-being and safety, school safety. This is a little bit different in how it's packaged than probably what the board has seen in recent months, but it does a lot of the same stuff. Now let me go break down the detail. Even before being sworn into office, Superintendent Truitt was really listening to stakeholders, industry professionals. She consulted research and other data points on how best to fund school support staff in our districts. If you talk to a superintendent or a principal, as many of you have, about hiring support staff, usually you hear that even if they had the FTE available, recruitment and retention are sometimes near impossible, especially for school psychologists. That is why we really focused and brought school psychologists and separated from the rest of the supporting staff here. We also have a major pipeline issue with the school psychologists. So we are listening to the field and the research on how best to provide services to our students. As a superintendent just discussed, school psychologists take on multiple roles inside the school building. On top of everything else we expect them to do, school psychologists also have the needed training to help diagnose students more appropriately, and so that learning disabilities are not confused with a student not being at grade level. And far too often, because of the lack of support, students are misdiagnosed, which prohibits teachers from getting to the root cause of a student's learning ability. Now, therefore, the department and board leadership felt it necessary to increase the benefits package of school psychologists in this budget request to not only recruit more qualified individuals, but to also retain them. We are also wanting to invest in a coordinator who will be tasked with targeting preparation programs around our state and country to bring those individuals into our public school system, as well as creating a vibrant internship program that will attract and allow future school psychologists to set up roots here in North Carolina. We also want to recognize, the Panorama Student Survey Pilot Program. This has been piloted across in separate school districts, but after talking to many superintendents, we want to bring this to a statewide platform, and this will help measure student perceptions of teaching and learning, culture and climate, and student experience in the classroom and school. Student perceptions of the classroom experience will help identify a teacher's strengths and areas for teacher growth. The survey data will not only be vital to our COVID recovery plan, but also will have the potential to providing more data on how to judge a school's performance above and beyond the A through F grading scale. As for the youth behavior survey, that's been on the state board's request for a few presentations now. And the final agenda item, the Center for Safer School Administration. This FTE request is the department and the state board getting creative to address general statutes that recently became law but did not provide any funding to go along with them. Superintendent Truitt and the board leadership feel as though hiring several dedicated employees to this division can help address mental health initiatives across the state and expand on what this section of the department is already working on.
To continue student mental health, well-being, and school safety, we also wanted to address several other pieces, particularly of the whole child, including exceptional children funding for future services. And also, as board member James Ford mentioned yesterday from Dr. Johnson's previous presentation on the Browning of America, an expanded funding request for allotment for LEP and ESL support. That we've listened to districts across the state, and this has been a growing challenge to not only fund ESL teachers, but also interpreters and family engagement programs. So this specific request would address this subset of our growing student population across the state. As Mr. Falconberry just alluded to, the student mental health and well-being being such a priority for both Superintendent Truitt and the board strategic plan, and that 16 to 17,000 potential enrollment of our kindergartners, a social and emotional learning pilot for these students could be a very important step in moving forward in the assimilation of our students in the 21-22 school year. The next request is for residential school staff and contractual services. And also very excited to welcome Dr. Catherine Edmonds to DPI as she works and successfully stand up the Office of Equity Affairs. So this particular line item will support that process and her team's endeavors to set up this very important division for the first time in our department. Again, a reflection of the board's strategic plan and equity resolution passed this fall. Lastly is a Braille update, another long-term strategy which will once again go to support the whole child responsibilities of this board. The next bucket is educator workforce development. And once again, we are looking to echo some of the earlier discussed priorities, including developing alternative pathways for teacher recruitment models. We've referenced teacher cadet, troops to teachers, TA to teachers, grow your own. So this line item specifically will set up a fund at the department that then would be able to hopefully be applied through district needs, whether or not they are looking to set up a teacher cadet program or to support their own troops to teachers and TA to teachers program. Advanced teaching roles, as discussed earlier with the Human Capital Roundtable, again, to support that advancement of our teachers. And right now in the state, we've got multiple districts who are setting this up, and we're hoping to add more in the future. The next line item budget is the new teacher support program. And through our discussions and setting this up, we could not think of a more crucial time to provide support to our beginning teachers. Many of our teachers who actually student taught at the tail end of the 1920 school year were not able to do that face-to-face. And then as they moved into the 21-22 school year, have not had the opportunity potentially to work in a face-to-face or in a traditional setting. So having that mentorship support that the new teacher support program provides will be crucial in our retention efforts across the state. The teacher working conditions survey tells us that the #1 reason that a teacher stays in their position is school leadership. So these next two line items support district models for principal recruitment and also turnaround principal training program to solidify the best of our school leadership across our state. The North Carolina Virtual Observation Tool is a way that we'll be able to hopefully do some observations and support for online and virtual remote teaching. The next line item is specifically an FTE to support educator recruitment and data visualization. And we are sorry, the next one, the educator licensure system, is actually not an individual request item. It is included in the school business systems modernization. The total of this bucket is actually correct. This is just not part of that total. It would be included in the SBSM. And then lastly, to hire a teacher NC administrator and recruitment coordinator to support this great program and the recruitment and retention efforts of our state. The next bucket is connecting middle and high school to post-secondary and career opportunities. As presented on yesterday by some incredible students and their perspective and lenses as to how they're becoming unbelievable contributors to society on their pathway to prosperity, is continued support of cooperative innovative high schools. And through that, added credentials and certifications to support those students in the CTE programs who are entering into our workforce, graduating from high school with a post-secondary opportunity that really speaks to their passions and to their talents. The next line item is a CTE credential and performance-based data collection and assessment system. And this will help CTE by maintaining, enhancing administration and testing. As also discussed yesterday in the board meeting, the Career and College Ready graduate program. And then lastly, as BizOp Chair Duncan mentioned, how do we support all the way down into our middle school the development of certain ways that our students can actualize themselves in post-secondary attainment. And this could be a career readiness assessment that we feel could be very important in that process.
And these last three items are kind of additions to what the board has seen. The computer science division request of $750,000. I think that's the same amount that the board had already put in there, but that also included professional development. Now that the board has adopted computer science as a part of the standard course of study, talking to Dr. Hemphill, it's just, I think she's a team of one plus maybe one assistant with her, and she just needs more additional support. So that's why the $750,000 is just for her division to get the regional support and get what's next is the professional development, which is $500,000 recurring, which is what we're going to need. As this board has probably heard before, by the year 2040, 70% of all jobs require some sort of computer science background. That means that children entering school now, by the time they graduate high school and college, are going to have computer science. We need to build that pipeline for the jobs of today and tomorrow. As for the economics and financial literacy PD, this is just taken straight out of the budget that was vetoed or did not come to fruition, and this is for the professional development for the new course that was adopted by the state board last year. Now, the Education Workforce Development Plan, this is another one that we've kind of morphed into more of advocacy rather than putting budget numbers on there. I'm just going to go through these because Superintendent Truitt and the chairman have talked about this in length over the past 2 days. So, but we know that the success of any great school is having a qualified teacher, and Superintendent Truitt just talked about that. So we will continue to advocate for teacher and principal raises from this department. Superintendent Truitt has consistently said that we need to be #1 in teacher pay for the Southeast. North Carolina was on the right track to achieve this goal, but unfortunately with the budget impasse of the last budget cycle, our teachers have not received a raise these past 2 years after receiving about a cumulative average raise of 20% the previous 5 or 6 years. Now, North Carolina still ranks #2 in the Southeast, right behind Georgia, but what we want to do here is work with the governor's office and their General Assembly, take the politics out of it, and just do what's right for the teachers. Plain and simple, let's just get us to #1 in the Southeast. The next item is not a new item with teacher recruitment and retention, but we will continue to keep our friends at the General Assembly apprised of the recommendations from Drive and Stride, as well as proposals that are presented to this board, like what was highlighted by SREB this morning, and what also Freeburg just focused on this section during the alternative pathways teacher recruitment models, which included teacher cadets and troops of teachers and all that. As for the principal recruitment, retention, and compensation strategies, just like we need a qualified teacher in every single classroom, we all know that the success of any great school starts with the principal. We know this because we've seen it. When you walk into a school, you immediately know if this is a good situation because of the leadership up top. Superintendent Truitt has repeatedly made this point. We believe we need to continue to work the work of the principal prep program pipeline that the department and groups around the state have worked on in recent years, but also the department is going to champion compensation plans that incentivize high-performing principals to stay at their school rather than bouncing from one to another. The data is clear. It tells us that for a principal to fully turn around a school, they need to be in the school for at least 4 to 5 years. However, we have bonus structures that incentivize principals to leave after 2 years. We're going to work with the GA to incentivize great principals to continue to build up their current schools while expanding the pipeline for more great principals to rise up across our state. As for teaching fellows, this is another one that we're going to advocate strong for. We've seen positive trends since the General Assembly revived it several years ago. We want to continue to support and grow this program and reach even more high school students in the state. This program can also assist our goal for recruiting a more diverse workforce. As we've heard in multiple board presentations, we know that roughly only 4% of high school students want to become teachers. Teaching Fellows is just another platform that we can use to inspire young adults to get into this profession. The North Carolina Education Corps, that's been on here before, and we want to continue this incredible program. It's been particularly great during COVID as well for our educators to support their efforts. As for bonuses for non-certified staff, as Superintendent just stated, we will be working with the General Assembly to give our non-certified staff much deserved bonuses. These bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodial staff, teachers, assistants, and many others have been on the front lines these past 2 school years. When every school went to remote learning, they were preparing and delivering meals, hotspots, and lesson plans to children across the state. And for the schools that have been back in person instruction, they provided invaluable resources to keeping the schools up and running, whether it is administering temperature checks, staying outside in all sorts of weather for staggered car lines, doing massive deep cleans regularly, as well as filling in for teachers when they had to miss school. Superintendent Truitt made it clear to us and with the board that our non-certified staff deserve to be not only praised for their compensation, or praised, but compensated for their tremendous service to our state. And that's why we're going to be working with the General Assembly to do that. Now for the school business system modernization. This one is going to look a little bit different too. The reason why is a lot of these items that are all in yellow were all staggered throughout the board budget request, the initial board budget request. And what we said is, why don't we bucket this into one silo to help explain, and it'd be much better to work with the General Assembly on getting this through. And I believe the superintendent already explained that this was already committed at about $200 million, but because of the budget impasse, it hasn't come to fruition. Well, I shouldn't say we, before we got here, the board and the department were able to cobble up some funds to keep it going during the interim, but I'll explain later on what happens if this does not get funded. The PSU fund, also, if after we do question and answer, if anybody has a question about specific items in here, we'd be more than happy to address them. For time's sake, I was trying to just put them all on the slide. The PSU funds have been in previous budgets. They're needed funds to support technology of the schools, as we pointed out, and as we've pivoted to more of a digital education system. The charter management system is kind of their backbone for housing all their data, for keeping track of all schools applying and monitoring all their systems. And the school bus routing support's been on the budget as well. Now, I'm sure you will say, how does the school business system modernization really fit into the goals for the superintendent and with the board? And so we were actually in a meeting with all the senior people, with Freebird, myself, and Catherine Truitt, the superintendent, said, you know, it would be great if we had a Venn diagram that could really showcase how this all comes together. And Carson Nelson on our team had actually already put one together. And I think this really, what it does is it kind of streamlines what the department's goals and also the superintendent's goals are. And now you can see how each one of these impacts the student, the teacher, the system, and really streamlining what we're trying to do with modernizing all of our all of what's going on around education in the state. Now, this is what I want to touch on. If school business modernization is not addressed, every public school unit will continue to see rising incumbent system costs of 125 to 400% on systems that are either out of support or lack functionality and security. So instead of spending funds on agency and LEA operations, we can spend these savings directly on the student in the classroom. If not addressed, every PSU will continue to have to produce uniform education reporting systems that will require data to be inputted manually, thus increasing staff costs, more money that can go straight to the student. If not addressed, DPI will continue to produce reports and make decisions on incomplete data that takes money and time to produce. Decisions will be made off this incomplete and inaccurate data. If not addressed, many of these PSUs, which are out of date and already at high risk, will be a greater threat of a security breach. We've already had several school districts suffer from cyber attacks over this past year. This program was mandated by the legislation and funded, or I should say committed, because there weren't budgets enacted into law to the tune of $200 million. But also with this last budget veto, it's caused us to fall way behind if current contractors and vendors pull out. DPI and the SBE will be forced to go back to square one, and we will have to rebuild SBSM and rebid contracts, adding years and incur higher costs. So that's the selling point that we're taking over to the General Assembly on why and how this is very important. Now, before I wrap up and turn it back over to Freebird, I'd like to sort of bring everything together with what we've added and streamlined into this budget. These budget requests from Superintendent Truitt that we've worked on with SBE leadership not only addresses the here and now with COVID-19 recovery, but sets a roadmap, if funded, for the department and board to have an incredible blueprint for success for years to come, putting our students front and center. By addressing the learning loss, many of our students from this school year, have incurred this school year, through the implementation of a statewide competency-based platform and focusing our attention to the science of reading, we can make tremendous strides in getting our children back up to grade level and hopefully beyond. Also, if done right and executed properly, by truly focusing on figuring out the pipeline that will help recruit and retain high-quality school psychologists and principals, we are setting up a generational transformation of what a highly functional school should look like. At the same time, we are requesting funds to modernize our systems, which set up our students and teachers for success and provide more transparency to elected officials and the public, all while ultimately saving tax dollars that can be reinvested right back into the classroom for the student. I'm personally proud of the budget and the vision that superintendent has put together and laid out before this board, and really want to thank the chairman, the vice chairman, Freeburg McKinney, and Murtha, Deanna Townsend Smith, and all the SB lawyers for truly working with Superintendent Truitt and our team to deliver a unified budget request that not only focuses on the challenges for today's students, but looks to lay a proper foundation for North Carolina children who have yet to enter our public school doors.
Thank you, Mr. Falconberry. And we are opening now up to questions if there are any on specific line items or any suggestions and feedback at this time.
I have a question or comment for Mr. Falconberry. This is the treasurer.
Please proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Falconberry, I'm sure you're already aware of this, but when you, in the spirit of trying to work together, and I'm not disputing any statistics that you gave about first or second or fifth in the nation or what to do for this group or that group, but it would be really helpful if people would take that extra step to have conversations, not just communications, to make sure that the numbers that you're using GHAL with, for example, Best NC and their booklet they put out, or Caroline Journal or the John Locke Foundation and their statistic they put out, that they just sent out a pamphlet on this particular subject. And I just think that if we're really serious about some of these issues, especially as it relates to pay, that it doesn't mean that people will agree. It just, if people can't even agree on the average of what people make, nothing's ever going to get really accomplished in any way, shape, or form. And the last part of that is that I think it'd be really appropriate, since our retirement board just passed our assumed rate of return numbers for the next 5 years. We know what the contribution on behalf of each employee is going to be for the next 5 years. And just for example, just on the pension, it's going to be about 16% of payroll. So if you take a $50,000 employee, it's not just what they make, it's the benefit of 16% of payroll. That's not their 6%, that's another 6%. So I just think that, along with I'm doing it off the top of my head, the $7,120 PMP year that has to be appropriated for the state health plan. I think it's just really important that as we move forward, and we're glad to help you and partner with you on any of this data to make sure that there's not space. There may be space about what can be done. There may be space about who it needs to be done for, whether it's school bus drivers or principals. But just making sure that all the numbers are baked in and that there's some consensus among these people that are also putting out information about what the average teacher pay is, I think would be very, very productive. And anything the Treasurer's Office can do to help in that regard, we're standing ready to help.
Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Thank you to Jamie and Freeburg for that incredibly detailed presentation. Treasurer Falwell, we look forward to working with you to help us communicate the total compensation package and its value to the education community at large.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments for the presenters?
This is Mariah Morris.
Yes, please.
I have a question about slide 7 regarding, it's the slide with the science of reading, training, and then the competency-based education platform. This slide really piqued my interest. Can you explain to us a little bit about the competency-based education platform?
This is Superintendent True. I'm happy to try and do that. The competency-based education platform is the Guru platform, which is a nonprofit organization that has offered to give districts the option of participating in a in their online tool that will help teachers provide diagnostic testing to students, as well as the lessons then that would support students to get caught up to where they need to be post-COVID. So in order for us to offer this option to districts, there would be some legwork that needs to be completed. And that is what those dollars are for.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan, this is Olivia. Or anyone.
No, Dr. Oxon, I apologize. Yes, please continue.
That's fine, thank you.
I'm turning my mute thing off.
Oh, I'm nervous right here that I'm going to turn on my video. Going back to a comment of maybe 30 minutes ago, I heard some startling data on the, I think it was something like only 30% of our students have a certified math teacher in the classroom. I may have that data flipped, but is there any area of the proposed budget that will begin to help us get into that problem? I suppose through our EPP recruitment or our own in-house division that would work in that area? Because that's pretty startling. I would see that as something that we need to begin to address right away.
Dr. Oxendine, this is Jamie Falkenberry. I'm going to pass over to Freebird, but what I will say is that this is on top of the money that this department already receives. So these are further budget requests, and so the department will obviously be looking at different ways that we can utilize professional development funds that already exist to address those sort of things with Superintendent Truitt's leadership. Freebird, like I said. Okay. No, Freebird's good.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Are there additional questions or comments? All right, I'm not hearing any, but you may be having the same problem with the mute button as I am. So I'll give a second and say this, that this is, for those members of the board who have been with us for a while as we've worked through budgets, this comes to you as a budget that's jointly recommended by the department and by the superintendent and her staff and by the BizOp committee and board leadership. We've worked hard on these items with the input of the board and genuinely hope that you feel as good about the efforts that have been undertaken as we feel. And so obviously we're going to welcome input whether now or later on that, but we really appreciate the work that the board put into this to set the base for how we go forward. and give thanks for that. Superintendent Truitt, did you have something else to add?
I echo those sentiments. I think the board's strategic plan certainly made it easy for my priorities to be fleshed out in alignment with what you all have been working on for the past few years.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for everyone for participation in this, and particularly thank you to Freebird and Jamie for the presentation today and the detail they provided. We're now going to go back to our regularly scheduled programming, and which will take us to new business, which would be our allotted average daily membership, or ADM. This is an item that we thought was important to put in there because it's an item that, as you all know, is important to funding for our districts and for any number of different categories. And there has been obviously a great deal of stress on an ADM system with the pandemic that it's brought on. And I think this is a very good time to stop and get a good understanding of where things are and take a look at what effects they may have as we go forward. So Alexis Schaus is here to give us a quick primer on not just what ADM is, but where we are with ADM as we move forward.
Good afternoon. It is budget season, and I think this new business item will blend nicely with the discussion on the budget expansion items. Because as you've been preparing budget requests, the department, specifically the Division of School Business, has been working on developing the budget pieces and building the budget for the State Public School Fund. And we are responsible for the $10.5 billion, making up 40% of the state general fund appropriations, in addition to hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds. And the main driver of these budgets is, not surprisingly, the number of students in North Carolina public schools. And with this small amount of funds, small shifts in population as a total and by grade can have a material impact on the public schools and the state public school budget as a whole. So the allotted ADM is the backbone of the State Public School Fund and the individual public school units budgeting. It affects all budgeting decisions from school assignment, employing adequate personnel, materials, transportation, long-term capital project planning. The allotted ADM, thank you. The allotted ADM is a number used for budget purposes only. It's not a number that we can provide rosters of students against. And the state board policy determines how this number is calculated. And per the policy, for each LEA, we compare our projections, the projections we develop in the Division of School Business for the upcoming school year, with the actual number of students in the first 2 months of the current year. And the budgeted number is the higher of these two numbers for each LEA. I am focusing on the LEAs today, so that because charter schools, it is slightly different, and I'm trying to keep this kind of as simple as I can with getting the information across. So the LEAs that have that are increasing in population are budgeted on their projection, and the LEAs that are decreasing in population are budgeted on their current year actual. So this graph here shows the allotted ADM over the past 20 years. And the green is the LEAs, the pink is the charter schools and others, which include our lab schools, the innovative school district, and regional schools. And you can see that the public school population as a whole has a steep growth pre-recession, then a moderate growth, followed by really no material change for the last 3 years. You'll also note, like in 2010, it looks like we had a big decline in population, but actually that was the year that kindergarten had a change in their cutoff age from October to August. So that shouldn't be considered. But why are we seeing this flat population? It is for a few factors. First of all, our birth rates have declined. And this, of course, is a critical number for determining our kindergarten cohort each year. The birth rate has in fact declined about 9% from 10 years ago. And you can see on the chart how this is reflected in low growth years for the North Carolina school age population, because of course these children, they get older and then enter our schools. And you'll see this big dip where it's very small growth between kind of 2018 and 2024. And we do expect that we will have an increase again, but at the moment we're seeing that flat birth rate, and as a result, the flat student population. North Carolina is also experiencing an increase in homeschools. This item is often not recognized or discussed, but it is reducing the number of students in entering our public schools. In the last 10 years, the private school, next slide please, thanks. In the past 10 years, the private school membership has remained very steady, where the red bar representing homeschool students has increased well above the private school and the charter school. So we can see that also is impacting our budgeted numbers. And they represent a challenge in projecting the total number of public school students to be funded. However, since the lifting of the cap for the number of charter schools in 2012, we've also had to adjust our projections to distribute the growing number of distribute the average daily membership amongst the growing number of public school units. Mostly these are charter schools, but also the other non-LEA schools that we have. The number of schools has doubled from 100 to 200, but not only that, the number of students in membership in charter schools has actually increased 3 times. And back in 2012, the average charter school had about 450 students, and only 11 of those schools had more than 1,000 students. And today we're looking at an average charter school being about 620 students, and we have over 30 schools that have 1,000 students. In fact, we have 4 that are over 2,000. But the impact of the charter school population is not, please remain, is not uniform for all the counties. You can see from the maps the growth of charter school membership by county. What this looks at is the number of students that attend a charter school, regardless of where that charter school is, by their county of residence. And back in 2012, we had two counties that had more than 12% of their population attending charter schools. And now moving in 2020, that number increased to 19 counties, and the most noticeable impact being in the Northeast and actually the Southwest, including Charlotte-Mecklenburg area. So the birth rates, transition rates, homeschool, charter school, and other economic factors do not affect the counties uniformly. And when we're looking at the impact by school district, or county in this case, the maps will show that pre-recession, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So when you're looking at the change in the population by LEA, and this does only include the LEA school membership, between 2004 and 2009, the change you can see down the I-40 corridor and the I-77 corridor, we were experiencing very high growth in those counties, and really the only area that was experiencing a big decline was in the Northeast. But when we look at the 10 years later, from 2014 to 2019, you'll see that we have very few counties that are in a growth status, and the yellow and the red are areas of decline, and red being the largest decline. So with all these things, how have we done historically with our projections? I don't mind saying that we have actually done quite well indeed. And this graph, which does show various 2 axes, one is the number of students that we kind of missed our projection by, and the other side is the percentage of it. So for example, in 2014, the actual ADM, the average daily membership was 825 students less than the 1,451,000 students that we projected. So our projection was within 0.06%. And then we move over to 2020. We were actually, the actual was just under 2,500 students more than the 1,423,000 projected. So there are a couple years that the projection was kind of a little bit over 5,000, but over the last 7 years, and actually for years before that, we're within half a percentage point. So moving back to what the allotted ADM is, it is the higher of the projection and the actual. And the impacts of COVID-19 on both of these pieces places uncertainty on developing an appropriate allotted ADM going into this next budget biennium. One more, please. This is the actual average daily membership of the LEA since 2005, and a few things to notice. First, we've got that steep pre-recession increase followed by the lower growth and then the post-2012 decline in total LEA ADM. And the major item is, of course, the dramatic decline in membership in 2020 due to COVID. And almost every LEA has this pattern for 2020 to a varying degree. The two orange dots are our preliminary projections for the next 2 years, but projections rely on historic data, and we have to incorporate the effect of COVID on the membership as a whole so that we can build the state budget at that level, but not only that, by LEA and also by grade level. And we can see that COVID has not impacted all grades to the same degree. And this will also have an impact on the budget build. Funding formulas are weighted differently for different student characteristics, including grade level. So for example, we fund, the state, that is, funds 1 teacher for every 18 kindergarten students, but it takes 29 students in 12th grade to generate a teacher. So the graph here, a few points to note that are important to the budget. First of all, the orange blocks are charter schools, and they actually all, as a whole, the population grew for every grade. And they were minimally impacted by COVID, perhaps because they are schools of choice. So if a student chose not to attend, they can go to a wait list. They also have capacity limits. And there may be other reasons related to that. But we'll also see that all in the LEAs, every grade dropped, with the exception of 10th grade, which is a little bit of a standout there. But the most noticeable is that kindergarten had the biggest decrease. For all these grades, the question is going to be what happens next year with each of these grades, because each one will have an impact on the budget. So the significant and one-time drop in ADM results in almost all LEAs being initially funded based on the projections, which will result in kind of an unprecedented reliance on the projections. And not just the projections as a whole at the state level, but for each individual LEA. So in a normal year, only those LEAs that were increasing in population would be funded on their projections. And so that was 41 LEAs in 2021. And the actual, but because the actual average daily membership due to COVID is so unusually low this year, it results in 108 of the 115 being allotted based on the projections. And so all of that sums up to the state level and our budget bill. So what impact does this have? On LEAs, the majority of the LEAs will see a decline in their allotted ADM because they will not be funded based on the historic, they will be funded based on their projections. And then secondly, with all the unknowns, our projections may not have considered what happens in the fall with regards to student membership, which may result in a large number of LEAs needing adjustments. And these adjustments only impact the allotments that are calculated on a per dollar basis. They do not adjust the categorical allotments such as low wealth or at risk and DSSF. And from a budget perspective, we need to ensure that the public school funding formulas are built on appropriate allotted average daily membership to ensure there is an adequate funding in the next biennium. And what we do know is that there will be an increase in average daily membership next year. The question is, what number will return and what grades will they return in? Has COVID accelerated the homeschool growth for those people who are on the fence to try it? Or perhaps as many LEAs have become virtual, they've started up virtual academies and schools, will these new schools attract more students back to the school, including the homeschoolers? So we're really looking at many unknowns, and they impact our ability to project the number of students, which will be the 2022 allotted ADM. So those were the items I wanted to kind of bring to you. I hope that it does provide a look at the state as a whole, some of the challenges that the LEAs are facing, even pre-COVID, with a decline in their population, which results in a decline in their budgets, but also looking forward to the next biennium budget and really establishing a good number for our allotted ADM for the budget.
Alexis, thank you for this timely and excellent report, which sets out for the board in clear terms and I think assists the public in understanding how ADM works and also understands the present difficulties of complete accuracy in making predictions, but the fact that there's a historical basis to suggest the department is very good at making predictions over the long term, but have a few more challenges in doing it right for the coming years. Are there questions and comments about and/or comments about this report?
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes, Ms. Kamens.
Mostly, I just want to say thank you to Ms. Schaus, because after all the years that I have been involved with schools and ADM, I think it's the first time that I've really, truly felt like I understand how the process worked pre-COVID and also what the difficulties are now. And it certainly helps me understand the angst that I'm hearing from superintendents in the Northeast about this very uncertain future for them. And some of them already pre-COVID were operating on a very narrow financial path. So thank you so much for this information. And it also gives me faith in the work that you're doing and the fact that you are taking all of this into consideration and trying to get this right next year. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kamens. Ms. White.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and thank you, Alexis, for the information. Just wanted to bring it to the board's attention as we're talking about ADM and particularly the unique relationship between ADM and charter schools. This past year, because of COVID, just wanted to bring it to the board's attention that there were several charter schools across our state who at the 20th day, which is where the ADM funds are, that allotment is then given to the charter schools. We had several schools that far exceeded their projections, and as a result of that, they experienced a significant shortfall. Ms. Schaus, I'll mention Bonnie Cone because I know that's one of the schools that had conversations with you and the Office of Charter Schools, but can you sort of explain what happened there, and is there any way to make that up for them with any of the COVID funds that we have for the students that they served, because parents chose to move their students to charter schools because they weren't being served in the traditional LEA?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. And as I kind of stated, I did not get into the other piece of our allotted ADM, which is our budgeting for the charter school side of the equation. So with charter schools, they provide us their projection. There are many things going on in a charter school that really only a charter school knows how many students that they are going to enroll in the next coming year. Bonnie, we received that number in January as a preliminary number, and we actually build our budget based on that number. They then have an opportunity in June to provide us another number, a final number. Most have the same number, but some charter schools, after they've gone through their lottery, etc., find that they need to increase it, and in some cases decrease it. So our number, they are locked in on that June number because those are the only, the school districts have been notified of that enrollment, and our budget is set on that. Bonnie Cone chose to enroll additional students that they were not, that we weren't budgeted for, and they were not budgeted for. And so that kind of puts us in a situation of not having the ability to fund them without affecting a school district. And we've used, this has come up in prior years, and we've kind of, in order to make sure that both the local education agencies can rely on their number, and a charter school is also provided that kind of concrete information. That's kind of the situation with Bonnie Cone. Does that make it clearer? It was related to the COVID money. No, we don't have those funds. The funds that we have for COVID are not for that purpose.
Thank you for offering that clarification.
Mr. Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
Just have a quick question. Alexis, as everybody has said, thank you. Wow. You know, to be perfectly honest, what a perfect storm we find ourselves in. I guess I would ask for you to make a personal projection here and just kind of tell us, what do you think the long range financial implications for many of these LEAs might be? So beyond sort of the next school year. And, you know, I'd be remiss to not, you know, mention also in the context of our already in process Leandro work, what do you think the long range financial implications will be as a result of this?
Well, I think the first thing, you know, I'd have to say is that it's not going to be the same for every school district. As those kind of maps show, that some school districts are just not affected in the same way. We have, it is hard for me to project out on the implications for all of the school districts, but you can see that there are areas that even pre-COVID are struggling with keeping a constant enrollment, and that they are declining. And there are a lot of fixed costs with a public school, right? You've got buildings, and when you don't have those students in there, it's hard to keep those buildings and those fixed costs are covered. So there are many that are struggling financially, and not just from the less state and federal funds that they're receiving, but also at a local level. It's not just the public schools and the student population that is declining. They're also experiencing that as their total population of the county. So there are I can't really say how COVID specifically is going to impact on the long term. I think it's just made a bad situation worse for some of those school districts.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Hall, please.
Thank you, sir. I have one or two questions, if I may. First is that LEAs are receiving planning budget to plan by going into the next year. My question is, did the planning figure, ADM, include this proposed reduction that's going to occur? Because you said majority of the LEAs would see a reduction in ADM funds. Did those planning dollars reflect that?
So how the process works is that once we establish our allotted ADM, and we are not, I did state that these are kind of preliminary projections. We are waiting for more current average daily membership, because some of these school districts have experienced students coming back between the first 2 months and now. So we're waiting for that information. Once we've solidified our allotted average daily membership, we will be providing documents to the school districts that will give them the financial implications of that by allotment category. For instance, how many teachers will be generated, etc., their low wealth supplemental funding, and other allotment categories, so that they can start building their budgets. And normally that is kind of mid-February. It may, we still do hope to stick to that same timeline for them, as they're obviously having to communicate to their county commissioners and work with their local superintendents. So we are hoping to get that out to them kind of the second and third week of February.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question I had about when will they be able to revise their budgets? Let's say something happens, luckily, to an LEA, and they see an increase. When can they apply? I mean, what's the turnaround with that? Getting those additional funds in as a result of an unexpected increase in ADM.
Right. So once the allotted ADM is all the initial allotments are calculated based on this number, and then once the students come in and we get the first and second month average daily membership of the next school year, the school districts, if they are outside of a 2% or 100 student threshold, they can request to the department for an allotment adjustment. The allotment adjustments are they are provided for those allocations that are generated pretty much just on a per average daily membership basis, like instructional supply, classroom teachers, those kind of things. It does not apply to low wealth supplemental funding, at risk, DSSF, and some of the other categorical allotments. So that will happen in the fall. It always happens. We usually have maybe a couple of school districts that happens to, but sometimes when Charlotte-Mecklenburg and Wake County were in these high growth, it was very hard to project them accurately, and because of the size of them, a misprojection can be a lot of money. So that is one of the concerns with everything relying on those projections. But that's the process. If you recall, it's also the similar process for a decline in average daily membership if they actually have less students than what they were allotted. And then this year, the General Assembly held them harmless to that.
Okay. Now, did you say earlier that the average size of a charter school today is around 630 students?
Yes, it's about that.
Okay. And did you say that you're seeing an increase? Did you say in the Northeast of charter schools?
Well, the charter school population has increased all over the state, but when we're looking at the percentage of the students that reside in counties that go to charter schools, the Northeast has a noticeably high percentage of students that are going to school in a charter school as opposed to the local education agency. So the percentage is higher there than maybe other counties in the state.
So the Northeast is seeing an increase.
They are seeing an increase,
Right.
and they are seeing a higher percentage, not only an increase, but also a higher percentage
Percentage,
than
right.
other counties.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
And thanks for the job you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Treasurer Falwell, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Schaus, for that presentation. And just a comment about a couple of things that you said. And number one is there's an old saying, especially when you get my age, that if you rest, you rust. And I'm glad that everybody got my treasurer humor, but yeah. The fact is, some of these school buildings have been resting. Obviously there's been things happening, but the water fountains hadn't been used as much as they were. The HVAC, circulation, whether it's heating or cooling, humidity, mold, and we really need to pray for the best as far as these buildings getting cranked back up to their full capacity, whether it's bathrooms or water fountains or HVAC systems. And second comment, very briefly, is that we have been doing a lot of work at the Treasurer's Office on what's happening in rural North Carolina, even pre-COVID. This is something that's been happening, evolving for 20 years. It's not a revolution related to COVID. It's been evolving in evolution for about 20 years, and working really closely as far as the public school construction money. And it's very important, and I'd love to sit down with Superintendent Truitt and talk about public school construction money and how it was initially allocated when the lottery was passed. Maybe only 60% of the counties were getting 100% of that money initially, and that was absolutely unfair and unjust. But secondly, to make sure that we're incenting the right behavior, we have a beautiful school in Winston-Salem on Renolda Road, some of you may be familiar with, called Old Town Elementary, and that was a 1900s building that had great bones, B-O-N-E-S, and school board, instead of tearing it down, which is the common thing to do, we figured out how to put good legs and arms on it. And I'm going to be working with the General Assembly and others who have an interest in making sure that we get the public school construction lottery money back up to the 40% of the lottery earnings, the way that it was passed on the floor of the House when it initially passed. But secondly, that especially in rural North Carolina or any part of North Carolina, that we are incenting the right behavior. We shouldn't give people money just to tear down buildings. If a community has good bones, they should be able to use some of this money for repair and renovation when it makes sense to do so. So anyway, those are a couple of things that we're working on to try to get more value and more dollars, because what I see happening with the local government, especially in rural North Carolina, is their ability to borrow money is not increasing, it's actually decreasing. And so anything that we can get to them for repair and renovation when that's appropriate is going to be extremely valuable to them and keeps them from borrowing money, which only eventually raises the cost to the property taxpayers of those communities, which is in many of these communities the last thing they need. So thank you for hearing that, and thank you for your work, Mrs. Schaus.
Thank you, Treasurer Falwell, for those comments. Any other comments or questions? All right. Alexis, thank you very much for that report. You will be back here on several other items, but that was obviously a report the board valued, so thank you for it.
You're welcome.
We are now, BizOp 6, by the way, we've already covered, which was the legislative and budget priorities, but we will be voting on that today. We're now on several items for action on first read. BizOp 1 is approval of contracts over $500,000. We have one significant contract, which has to do with our internet services connectivity. I don't know that I've gotten any questions about it. I don't know that we need a deep report here. But either Shannon Hanchy or Mike Ramsey, perhaps, could you give us a brief report of the importance of this contract and how it is lined up to proceed?
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. This is Michael Nicolaides.
Oh, very good, Mike.
Yeah. Yes, good afternoon. We're requesting approval to exercise the final optional one-year extension of the contract we have with DIT to provide internet access, content filtering, and firewall services to our public schools beginning in July at a cost not to exceed $22 million. DIT subcontracts the internet and content filtering to MCNC, and they provide the firewall services themselves. We are asking to get this contract extension approved now because of the E-rate calendar, as we have to be submitting our E-rate applications by March 15. So we would like to get the approval to extend the contract now. And I'm here to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Are there any questions? This is a significant contract, so I did think it's worth stopping for a minute to at least understand the importance of it, and obviously one of great value. All right, not hearing any questions or comments on that one. Let's go on to BizOp 2, which is the Century Community Learning Center's Summer Mini Grant Competition. I believe Dr. Tricia Townsend is ready to lead us through this discussion.
Yes, sir, I'm here. I'm ready.
Great.
Okay. I'm delighted to share with you information about the 21st Century Learning Community Summer Mini Grant. The funding that we will utilize for this particular grant comes from Title IV, Part B of ESEA. And so these particular funds, we really want to make sure that we take an opportunity to get additional funds out the door to really help mitigate summer learning loss. In statute, they are very clear about what these funds should be used for. They should be used to offer academic support, enrichment activities that complement core subjects, and they also suggest that they be used to really enhance family and parent engagement. Entities who are eligible for 21st Century grants are public school units, community-based organizations, city or county government agencies, faith-based organizations, IHEs, as well as for-profit corporations. Now I want to take a minute to really discuss equity within our distribution of grants. This is a conversation that I've had many, many times with Vice Chair Duncan, and he's really asked us to really stretch and think about how we distribute funds to really ensure that our neediest students are able to really benefit from these grant dollars. And so what you see before you is a breakdown of the recommended applications by region in our last cycle of grants. And so looking at this, what we've tried to do is to come up with a system that really enables a greater level of parity across the regions. And so what we've decided to do is to change our scoring process just a little bit. And so after applications are ranked based on the rubric that's provided in the RFP that is provided to you in your materials, the applications will be split into each of the regions, and we will be able to award applications with the top performers across the various regions. And so we are proposing that we select a minimum of 2 per region. And then after we've done that, there will be some additional we will rank order them and then be able to distribute the additional monies that we have available. And so a little bit about the program. I've just explained how it will be selected by region, which is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. These awards will range from $50,000 up to $300,000, and that is based on the number of students served as well as the duration of the program. These programs, we have a tiered system to really determine where you fall within that range. And so some are proposing to serve as few as 50 students, And then we have it all the way up to over 300 students, 300 to 500 students. And then in terms of duration, our table really looks at whether they want to provide a 4-week or a 6-week program. We will be able to provide priority points based on students attending Title I schools, as well as schools being entities being in distressed counties. I do want to really note that typically when you are doing 21st century, those are 3-year awards. This summer mini grant is just a one-time funding amount. It would not obligate us to do a 3-year cycle for these grantees. Another grant opportunity will be presented at the next board meeting. That will be our cohort 15. And we are limiting this to previously funded non-governmental agencies. The short time frame that we have among us, it just really would not enable us to really add additional organizations at this time. So previously funded federal or state funded agencies. Our timeline, the application will be entered into the CCIP system and it will be available on Monday. Entities can begin accessing that and filling out their application. We will provide 2 opportunities for technical assistance, and the application will be due in March. And we will follow up with the state board to offer you our recommendations in May. Okay. I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have, Vice Chair Duncan.
All right, thank you very much for that report. And we look forward to hearing about these, what I'm going to call mini grants, as you have called them, because they're not the usual cohort. There's something additional that will be very helpful to a number of communities who are fortunate enough to get these grants to help with learning loss during this upcoming summer. And we look forward to hearing about the 3-year grant cohort number 15 at our next meeting, which also will be important. And thank you for the work that you're doing to make sure that all parts of our state are able to share in the grant opportunities that are out there. Are there questions or comments about this mini grant program for this summer that we'll know more about in May in terms of proposed recipients?
Vice Chair Duncan, I'd like to just echo your thanks with mine that that a little bit of equity is going to be involved in granting these awards this summer.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. All right, not hearing any others, let's go on then to our next item, which is BizOp 3, Innovative Partnership Grant, and Dr. Townsend is right back with us.
Okay, happy to share. Okay, we can move to the second slide. So all schools who have the federal designation of comprehensive support and improvement, or CSI, receive an allotment from our Title I Part A state allocation. To qualify to have this designation, it is on the basis of low performance or low graduation rate. The Ipg Grant is a competitive grant that provides additional fiscal support over and above the required allotment that these schools receive. A little bit here. I'd like to kind of back up a little bit. Our Ipg Grant is preceded by the School Improvement Grant, or SIG, which is in its 5th and final year. So as we're sunsetting this program, we're also in our 1st year of the Ipg Grant. And so we have taken the liberty of making some tweaks to this particular grant. And so it was first awarded in 2020 in 2 separate cohorts, which we have combined into cohort 1. Cohort 1A and 1B now are just cohort 1. And what we've tried to do is to really make a shift in federal programs to add an extra layer of support beyond that of what you see in our regional support model. We have a school improvement program administrator whose time and effort is dedicated to this cause. That's Dr. Melissa Nixon. She provides technical assistance to IPG schools and works to really ensure that the schools and the partners work seamlessly. As you can see across the table, we are really working to distribute funds in a more equitable fashion. Here again with this grant, we are shifting to a regional selection model. We will first select one school per region, and then the remainder will be selected on the basis of total rank order. I do need to point out the state board does have a policy that really asks when you are in the competitive or discretionary grant process that you rank applicants into one of 5 quality bands. So excellent, strong, average, weak, or unacceptable. It is important for me to let you know that although we've moved to the regional model, we still expect a minimum level that applicants would need to reach. And so applicants must be in the excellent, strong, or average bands to be considered for funding. Any application that falls below that, that would be weak or unacceptable, would not be eligible for funding at this time, regardless of the region. You also will see in the bottom row that we've moved away from a flat award amount. And so we saw this a little bit in cohort 1A. There were schools that ranged in size. And so we really wanted to make sure that we moved to a model where per pupil amount was considered, and it wasn't just a flat amount. If you have a small charter school that applies for this grant, they are not going to need the same thing as a large comprehensive high school. So we want to award accordingly. And then we'll move to the next slide. I'll offer you some information about the distribution of cohort 1, and then help you understand where our new potential applicants might come from. And so what I do want to say is that we've already begun leveraging our staff at DPI in an effort to improve the number and quality of the applications that we receive. Our federal program school improvement staff recently met with regional case managers in our most underserved areas, the Northeast, the Northwest, and West, to share information about this great grant opportunity and to really help them start to see how they could support those in their region that are eligible for this grant. Okay. Grant timeline. So for this particular grant, we have added a step. There will be an intent to apply form. Schools that are interested in applying, they will let us know that. And after we receive that and determine if they are indeed eligible, that would mean they would have that CSI designation. We will then provide them with the application. We'll also provide in February some technical assistance. Grant applications will be due in April, and then we will be back before the board in July to provide information to you about our recommendations for funding.
Any questions or comments on this grant program, the Innovative Partnership Grant that we'll be moving forward with, and the comments that Dr. Townsend has made about the approach for judging the grants as we move forward? All right, not hearing any. Dr. Townsend, thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you and your team are doing on these grants, which are very important to the districts and/or institutions that receive them. So thank you for the work.
You're welcome.
That now brings us to BizOp 4, which is the approval of the Digital Learning Initiative grants for public school units. And Dr. Vanessa Wren, I believe, has this item.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I'm so glad to bring to you our second round of Digital Learning Initiative grants for your approval today. The Digital Learning grants are part of the state Digital Learning Plan, and they are designed to promote adoption and sustain quality digital literacy practices across the state. We heard at the last quarter update for the DLI, how we've heard, I think we heard from Edenton to Tawan schools and Mooresville Graded District, how they were positioned better to support and respond to blended learning as a result. So it's always nice to hear when some of the work is actually providing good outcomes for students and teachers. So you may recall that we offered a second round of applications for the 2020-2021 year due to the timing and the overall landscape of what was going on in our schools. So we're bringing forth a total of 12 grants for your approval. And I have to say, I'm always impressed with the level of innovation and thought that each school district and charter submits with their proposal and with their plan of work. The proposals this round focus on improving educator capacity by earning micro-credentials, developing locally created digital resources, competency-based and personalized learning initiatives. And so as we have been focusing on equity and excellence, and we hone in using various efforts to eliminate the digital divide, these grants work towards that end by providing opportunities for our rural and our economically distressed districts. I'm now going to turn it over to our Southwest Regional Consultant, Lindsay Sipe, who spearheads this initiative along with our Northeast Consultant, Julie Gerganis. And I also want to take a minute to thank them both for their work on this. They have done an excellent job with the Tier 1, 2, and 3 reviews, and also the back end and forward support of all the grant awardees that they do. So, Lindsay?
Good afternoon. I am pleased to present the second round of public school units that we're recommending to receive Digital Age Learning Initiative grant funding. You'll see that during the 2020-2021 DLI RFP for the first and second round, we received a total of 46 applications from across the state. If you recall, for the 2020-2021 school year, there were two types of grants that were offered. Planning grants are intended to support, coach, and provide resources to public school units as they develop new digital teaching and learning initiatives. We received 7 applications for the second round of planning grants. The implementation grants are intended to provide coaching, support, and resources for public school units that put their plans into action for digital teaching and learning funds, and that's over a 2-year period. We received 10 applications for the second round of implementation grants. We believe that these recommended public school units represent a diverse applicant pool, and they were identified by the team of evaluators in alignment with the board policy for competitive grants. Looking at the next slide, you'll see based on available funding, we are recommending that 4 of the 7 PSUs be funded with planning grants. As you can see, the breakdown of applicants that we're recommending for planning grants include 4 traditional school districts that span the state of North Carolina. On the next slide, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the goals and objectives for each PSU that we're recommending. So the first that you'll see is Buncombe County Schools, and they're planning on working to develop an interactive profile template for their scholars. The work will be grounded in personalized learning. Lincoln County Schools will be building a student learning dashboard that includes student performance data, learning preferences, goals, and much more. Cataract County Schools will begin a new iteration of their Digital Trailblazer program to have a larger impact on blending learning experiences, and that will span the entire district. Edgecombe County Schools will begin working to establish a flex learning leaders team that will build professional development around personalized learning. We're incredibly proud to be partnering with these districts that are building such profound examples of innovation, engagement, and digital teaching and learning. The next slide provides a visual breakdown of the recommended public school units for the planning grant. A map with these recommendations is shown on attachment 3 as well, if that's useful for you. The visualization gives a visual representation of the impact of DLI grants that they have across the state of North Carolina. And on the next slide, we will take a look at the recommendations for the 8 out of 10 public school units that we would like to be funded for implementation grants for the second round of DLI grants. The breakdown of applicants that we are recommending for the implementation grant includes 7 traditional school districts and 1 charter school. On the next 2 slides, I would like to highlight the tremendous efforts that will begin for the 2-year implementation grantees. The first is Alamance Burlington School System, and they are planning to strengthen digital learning and teaching leaders throughout the PSU by providing opportunities for a large cohort of teachers to be certified in Google and Canvas. Beaufort County Schools will be working to build sustainability by providing an opportunity for teachers to build, design, and implement digital learning resources. Currituck County Schools will be providing cohorts of teacher opportunities for collaboration, Google Suite training, and much more. Davie County Schools has built a customized plan to target 4th through 8th graders that are struggling with proficiency in ELA and math. Gaston County Schools will begin to build and continue development of the Trailblazer program, and that will promote personalized learning along with North Carolina digital learning standards. On the next slide, you will see that Hope County will be working to establish personalized learning by developing and customizing personalized learning instrument and a learner profile management system. Lincoln County Schools is planning to establish a micro-credentialing program for teachers. They'll be working to get 350 of their teachers in a pathway that help to establish North Carolina digital learning standards, as well as personalized learning. Finally, Northeast Academy of Aerospace and Advanced Technologies plans on expanding their work of standards-based grading and project-based learning through the personalized learning lens. And moving on to the next slide, you'll see that we've provided another visual breakdown for the implementation grants, showing how they span across the state of North Carolina. And lastly, I just wanted to take a minute to share the map of the DLI grants that are currently running across the state of North Carolina. This map can be found on attachment 3, page 3, if a closer look might be beneficial to you. We have worked diligently to ensure that there is a spread of equity across DLI grant funds throughout the state of North Carolina, and we want to make sure that's done in an impactful manner. We're thrilled that every North Carolina board-approved region will be represented with Digital Age Learning Initiative grants. Not just any grant, but a grant that we know has a tremendous impact on staff, students, the state board region, as well as across the state of North Carolina, as we continue to focus in on digital age teaching and learning, micro-credentialing, and personalized learning. I would like to just take a moment to thank you so much for your support of the Digital Age Learning Initiative and the work occurring across North Carolina public school units. We're very much looking forward to the continuation of the DLI grant initiative.
And thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. And that concludes our presentation. And if there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you for the presentation and the good news of for many of these districts and the good work being done. Are there questions or comments about these digital initiative grants? Digital learning initiative grants, excuse me. All right, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. We're now at BizOp 5, which we are back to what I'll call the Alexis Schaus section of the program for BizOp 5, 7, and 8. 5, I think we can do relatively quickly. It's an annual matter that we end up making some amendments. So, Alexis, if I can turn that to you, please.
Yes, sir. So BizOp 5, it is presented as action on first read, and this is a modification to the 2021 North Carolina Public School Personnel Salary Manual. You have the chapter of the salary manual that is requested for approval as an attachment in the materials and is shown here. You may recall that you approved a number of salary manual changes back in August, However, after that time, legislation was passed that affected principal salary, and an update to the manual is being reflected to reflect that legislative change. So this change requires the LEAs to use the 2019-20 average daily membership to determine the salary classification of principals for the entire fiscal year, and not update the classification for the current year average daily membership. It prevents the principal salary classifications from being impacted by the decrease in average daily membership due to COVID. And then the second change is new language. It is not legislation, but it is recommended as a State Board of Education policy, and it provides language on how to treat principal salary calculation in the event that two schools merge. This is not a very common event, but the recommended policy states that the principal salary is determined by the sum of the average daily membership of the two schools prior to the merger. And without this change, the salary classification is determined by just the average daily membership of one of the schools. So that is what the two recommendations are.
Very good. Are there questions or comments about these recommendations for board policy with respect to the school employee salary manual? All right, not hearing any. Thank you for that report. We now move to two discussion items, both of them important, both of them relating to ESSER funding, both ESSER 2 and ESSER 1. So BizOp 7 is the ESSER 2 Relief Fund allotment policy discussion. Alexis, let me turn that to you, please.
Yes, sir. This is presented as discussion, and it recommends a new allotment policy for the federal funds appropriated under the Federal Coronavirus Relief Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations. And that was enacted on December 27th, 2020. And although these funds are described as supplemental to the $396 million of ESSER 1, which we're all familiar with, we distributed that last spring. ESSER 2 is 4 times larger at a total of $1.6 billion for North Carolina public schools. As is the same as in ESSER 1, a minimum of 90% is required to be allotted to eligible public school units according to the proportionate share of the Title I funds they receive. And as is normal for all the federal funds, the public school units will develop an application, and the public school units are required to submit an application and a budget to the Federal Programs Division, and only after that approval may the funds be allotted. The period of availability is 1 year longer than ESSER 1, so these funds do not expire until September 30th, 2023. There's no requirement for equitable services to non-public school students and teachers as there was in ESSER 1. And unrelated to this funding, there is funds that non-public schools may apply for through the Governor's Emergency Relief, the GEAR funds in this second batch. And we'll be discussing this in the March State Board meeting. So to be clear, this policy that is being presented for discussion only relates to the funds that shall be allotted to the public school units and not funds that may be reserved for the state level initiatives and the administration. In your materials, I believe we do have the estimated planning allotments by public school units, and these were calculated based on a 90% distribution.
Right. Thank you very much. This should look familiar to board members. This is the same basic approach that was taken with respect to the original ESSER 1 funds for the 90% distributions. I think sometimes our minds automatically go to it be a straight ADM division, but it's important, as was pointed out, that it's distributed under a Title I allotment. So if, for example, you took two relatively same size systems, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Wake, Charlotte Mecklenburg has a higher Title I distribution, therefore the amount of money distributed on this will be a little bit higher to Charlotte Mecklenburg than it will be to Wake in this instance. And you'll see similar comparisons one could make throughout the course of the proposed allotments, but so everyone realizes on the front end that this is consistent with the Title I formulation for allotments. It is the approach that is recommended that be taken in this for these particular funds. This also leaves open, of course, the board's proposed holdback of approximately $160 million upon recommendation from the superintendent and or board leaders, and I think we will have both. And we'll have a plan formulated for that. It's also important to note that in terms of distribution of these funds, we need to develop guidelines within the constraints of the federal statutory scheme for this, guidelines on how the districts can most effectively use these funds in the critical effort of recovering our learning challenges from the pandemic, which is the purpose of making these funds truly work for us and, more importantly, work for our students and educators. So this is a proposed allocation policy for the 90%. I think we can expect to receive a recommendation for the board to look at and work on to withhold the 10%. Remember, 0.5% of that amount, or approximately $8 million, would be reserved for administrative expenses. And the remaining $152 million, again using approximate numbers, will be for initiatives to assist in the recovery from the COVID period and the learning loss that has been sustained during that time, and the emotional supports and well-being of our students that are tied to that. So that we can reasonably expect a lot more work for the board in the coming weeks and next couple of months, as well as seeing more detailed guidance from how the districts are hopefully receive best practices for how to best use these funds in the most effective way. Are there questions and comments with that background?
Vice Chair Duncan, I do have a question, a quick question.
Yes, please, Dr. Oxenberg.
Yes, thank you so much. With respect to the holdback, I think you said of 8% of the money for administrative oversight.
10%, Dr. Oxenberg.
10%. I'm sorry.
And then 8 million, or half of 1% of that, would be the administrative holdback.
Okay, that is the portion that I want to ask a question about. So, would that be used for hiring additional staff to manage and administer the fund? Is that or to enhance existing operations?
It would be for administration of the funds and administration oversight. As you recall, the first round we had 1.9 million. For example, we had compliance officers that we hired to assure to follow the funds. There's strict auditing procedures from the federal government to come with this. We also voted to add some internal auditors to focus on making sure we could account for these funds appropriately and fully within the guidelines, which is moved forward on both of those. And there are some additional appropriate, we're going to be asked to approve a couple of additional proposals from our meeting this week as part of the vote in a few minutes. And there will be others that will come along who will also fit in that, who will be charged with the implementation of these funds in a way, again, that sets forth the board's and the department's purposes for accomplishing the benefits of it with fidelity and oversight. Superintendent Stewart, do you want to add to that?
Just that I wholly concur with your statements.
Well, thank you.
I didn't hear that.
Superintendent Truitt concurred with that.
Okay,
that
very good.
Summary, yes.
All right, very good. Thank you. That was my question. You've answered it.
Thank you for the question. Are there other questions or comments on this? All right, not hearing any, we're going to go to our last item for discussion, Biz Op 8, which is a coronavirus relief funds extension. Ms. Schaus will again cover this. This is the item that caused her to not have much of a holiday vacation. She can explain. Alexis, I think you're muted if you are, and believe me, I understand that problem.
Thank you. Yes, it's a new year, so we move on, and and forget that bit. So BizOp 8, it is presented as discussion, and it modifies the expiration date of CRF funds. As a refresher, these are the CARES Act funds that were provided to the state and then appropriated by the General Assembly through session law. The State Board of Education approved the distribution of the funds with the expiration date of December 30th, which was consistent with the federal law. And as you can see on the screen and in your materials, you have a report showing the status of the expenditures as of December 31st, 2020. On December 27th, 3 days before the expiration, the federal law modified the expiration to December 31st, 2021, so the end of this calendar year. And therefore, we're recommending the extension of the CRF programs to this date, where allowed in current North Carolina law, and noting two exceptions. So the two exceptions that we are not recommending to extend to that date, one is PRC 133, which is the Ellis grants that went to nonprofits. These grants were provided until December 30th, and closeout procedures had been materially completed by the time the federal legislation became law. There's already been a report compiled on the performance of these grants. So as a result, we are not recommending expiration past that December 30th date. Also for PRC 138, the gaggle licenses, these awards were provided for licenses that expired June 30th, 2021. So we're recommending that that expiration be in line with that and modified to June 30th, 2021. You'll see in that handout, in the column that says expiration, you'll also note that there are some that still remain at December 30th. Some of these is due, well, no, the reason that these are still at December 30th is that it is explicitly stated in the session law that the expiration date is December 30th or June 30th in a couple cases. And so we do not have the authority to just to change that because it is in state law. So these funds include the CRF funds related to school nutrition, the Summer Jumpstart mental health instructional support positions, Lowell supplemental funding, PPE, and then the bus safety grant, which actually has been entirely expended anyway. Legislators did recognize that the session law places these restrictions, and just this past Monday, Senate Bill 36 and House Bill 42 were filed to permit the extension to go up to December 31st, 2021. And we do anticipate that extension will become law, and we will be able to recommend the modifications at next month's meeting.
And would the funds in those columns have the same flexibility that was granted ultimately by the law near the end of the tenure of the December 30, 2020 timeframe?
Yes, they do. We have notified the public school units that they do still have the transfer authority that was set by NC Pro through legislation. So they can move those funds between those categories, and some continue to do so. So yes.
Very good. They can make the most effective use of the funds within certain prescribed categories still, and that's a great benefit. So thank you. Well, Alexis, you've taken on several things today. Thank you for that, and also for Dr. Townsend and Dr. Wren for their reports as well, and Mr. Nicolaides. We have one consent item with certification of finance officers. You will recall this is a regular item we have. We have one for Jones County and one for the Mooresville Schools' new chief financial officers, and congratulations to them on their new posts. I've not received any questions on the executed contracts report or the planned contracts report, so I'll pause for a moment in case there are any. All right. Not hearing any, then on our monthly budget report, I've also heard no questions or comments for this month. Again, I'll pause in case there are. And then finally, on the agency vacancy report, as we referred to earlier, there'll be a more detailed, I have not received any questions about it to this point, and someone has one, we certainly want to deal with it, but we also want to remind that there will be a more detailed report with respect to positions and hiring upcoming from the superintendent and her staff in most likely at our next meeting in March. So with that quick rush to a close, thank you for your patience as we had a lot of items today, but I very much appreciate all the work that's been done to get us through. Chair Davis, I return it to you happily.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. That concludes our committee work for the day. We do have a few items of new business. First is a brief report on the North Carolina Education Corps, which continues to build momentum. And this past Thursday had the official launch in 21 districts across our state. We look forward to the collective impact it'll have on our students and our state as we work to systemically address our student needs pre and post COVID. I now call on former State Superintendent Dr. Mike Ward and Mr. John Paul Smith of American Ripples to provide us a brief update on the progress of the North Carolina Education Corps. Dr. Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, board members. A lot's going on with Education Corps. Our Corps members have been trained and they're working school districts around the state. They're working in a number of roles in these districts and they're making a difference for students and educators. I want to call on John Paul, our very capable project director for Education Corps, and have him provide some of the details about the deployment of Corps members and the work that they're doing in the districts. John Paul?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Ward. Our virtual kickoff event, Corps member deployment numbers, and the specific roles that Corps members are playing in local districts in particular. Last week, first kickoff event, virtual kickoff event with the first wave of our inaugural Corps, as Chair Davis mentioned. We had 175 attendees, including members of the state board and DPI staff, and we appreciate many of the members of this call for attending that event, and we're particularly thankful to Chair Davis and Dr. Deanna Townsend-Smith for offering words of inspiration to the inaugural cohort. If you'd like to see the launch video for North Carolina Education Corps that we premiered during our kickoff, you can see that in the agenda notes. It'll get you up out of your chair, I can assure you. And I want to say that, while we're excited to see what North Carolina Education Corps becomes, it is worth taking a moment to recognize that the kickoff event was a historic moment, and it's really a tribute to the hard work that the state board, DPI, Volunteer NC, school district administrators, and a whole host of community partners have done to launch the North Carolina Education Corps since September. It's clear that North Carolina Education Corps is fast becoming a powerful tool to address statewide learning loss and social emotional challenges, and to engage talented, caring North Carolinians to support students in the wake of COVID and beyond. In the immediate term, Corps members are serving primarily as tutors, mentors, and contact tracers, and a few others are serving as digital navigators and counselors' aides. In terms of the rollout timeline, the first Corps members started in Winston-Salem for Forsyth County Schools on January 5th, and since then, over 130 Corps members are in the field across 7 of DPI's 8 education regions, and another 130 will join this spring as school districts return to in-person instruction and complete their hiring processes. One such district is Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, in collaboration with the Education Corps and in collaboration with Reed Charlotte, is looking to hire 70 tutors and 35 contact tracers who will start for the 4th quarter. And that'll be an interesting model. They're going to start in the 4th quarter, and tutors will serve 4th quarter through the summer. In terms of training of Corps members, all of our Corps members complete pre-service and ongoing training, and they benefit from the ongoing support of our staff as well as local school district site supervisors. And together with partners at DPI like Dr. Stegall, Dr. Molinix, and Amy Ryan, as well as others like Monroe Richardson at Reed Charlotte, we are continuing to refine the training and ongoing support for Corps members to make sure that we are supporting Corps members in a way that they can really provide students with the support that they need as they're looking to improve academic outcomes as well as non-academic outcomes. Mike, turn it back to you.
Thanks, John Paul. John Paul's been providing extraordinary leadership, and he's managing a lot of things. He and his colleagues on the project management team are managing a lot of things in a lot of places and doing it well. As he noted, we're in the first phase of core member deployment and service to the districts, and the variety of tasks that he mentioned that core members are performing reflect a lot of ways that the pandemic is impacting our schools and students. But we're also looking ahead, and we're going to transition in the coming semesters to a tight focus on literacy. Core members will receive high quality training that turns them into capable tutors for students who need the greatest assistance with mastery of reading. I've followed with great interest the very tight focus of this board on literacy and on reading mastery for students. And that'll be a tight focus for Education Core as well. So stay tuned. We'll be providing updates to you on this next phase of the work in the Education Core. We have some good news relative to funding. As we pointed out before, districts are paying the living stipend for core members, and they're primarily using GEAR funds for this purpose. The central administrative activities of the Education Core include things like core member recruitment, training, district support. These costs are not paid by the districts, and to date, they've been underwritten by startup funds from the Office of the Governor. Last month, Chair Davis told you of the incredible commitment of $500,000 from an anonymous donor. And as if that weren't enough, the same donor is willing to match funds that we raise from non-government sources up to another $500,000. So the total impact, at least the total potential impact of this donor's generosity is $1.5 million. We have commitments so far from $300,000 from other foundations, and we're in conversation with and submitting applications to other benefactors. We are determined to raise all of those matching funds and more. So that's our update. I want to thank you, board members, for supporting the North Carolina Education Core. These core members are bringing much needed support to kids, to educators and communities, and you made it possible for them to do so. Mr. Chair, that concludes our report. We're happy to answer any questions.
Questions from my colleagues? And we offer our thanks to you, Dr. Ward, and Mr. Smith, and all the members who are working on the Education Core, and we look forward to more exciting reports from you in the days ahead. Thanks so much. Board members, we do have 3 additional items of new business that have been part of our discussion previously in this meeting. First is the approval of the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit. As previously mentioned, this past Tuesday, Governor Cooper, along with Secretary Cohen, Superintendent Truitt, and I strongly encouraged our local school districts and charter schools to provide in-person instruction for as many students as possible in accordance with the health protocols contained in the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit as amended on February 2nd, 2021. Those revisions were the ones presented to the board today by our DHHS partners. As a result, the motion before us today is as follows. In accordance with Session Law 2020-49, the North Carolina State Board of Education approves as official guidance for in-person instruction for the remainder of the 2020-21 academic year, unless otherwise extended or modified, for all elementary and secondary public schools in North Carolina, the requirements outlined in the Strong Schools North Carolina Public Health Toolkit K through 12, issued by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services on June 8th, 2020, and is most recently amended on February 2nd, 2021. The second item of new business is approval of the use of ESSER 1 funding for 2 administrative support positions upon the request of Superintendent Truitt, as discussed yesterday in closed session. And then the third new business item is adjusting the State Board of Education calendar, moving our May meeting to May 11th through 13th, which includes our spring planning and work session. Are there any questions on these items that will be included in our action items today? Okay, hearing none, board members will now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. Call your memory that any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. And I note also that board members have seen the consent items.
Chair Davis.
For at least a week. I ask now that the minutes reflect that Ms. Kamnitz has recused herself from BizOp 2. Are there any other board members who seek to recuse themselves from any item coming before us today? Hearing none, I note for my colleagues that we will vote on SLA 1 separately. So we'll handle that one in just a moment. Are there any other requests to remove any other items from the consent action or action on first reading agendas for a separate vote? Hearing none, I seek a request for a motion to approve the following. The January 5th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting minutes, the January 6th through 7th, 2021 meeting minutes, and the January 27th, 2021 meeting minutes. And then the following committee items: EICS 1 and 2 and 9 through 12, SLA 2 and 3 and 6 through 10, S&P 1, the IPL and ILT licensure approvals discussed yesterday's closed session, BizOp 1 through 6, authorization of superintendent's request to use ESSER 1 funding for 2 administrative positions, 2021 State Board of Education meeting calendar change for the May meeting to May 11th through 13th, and the revisions to the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit as presented. Is there a motion?
Should I make the motion and add BizOp 9 to the motion to approve, which is a consent item?
Yes, so we'll add BizOp 9 to, thank you for that, Mr. Duncan. We'll add BizOp 9 to this motion, and I hear Mr. Duncan making the motion for approval. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Ford.
Second by Mr. Ford. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz? Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chasteen?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. Next, we'll move to voting on SLA 1. And I call on Ms. Kamnitz as chair of the SLA committee.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I move to approve the revised social studies standards, otherwise known as Draft 5, presented to the board on February 3rd, 2021, and recommended by DPI, with the addition of the preamble offered by Superintendent Truitt at the February 3rd, 2021 board meeting, and to require board approval of any supporting documents that will be distributed by the department to accompany the new social studies standards.
Motion by Ms. Kamnitz. Is there a second?
I'd like to make a second. This is Donna Tipton Rogers.
Second by Dr. Tipton Rogers. Any discussion on this motion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Ford.
Yes. If I may, while Draft 5 of the standards are no doubt ultimately an improvement over the draft 3 presented to us in June. I still disagree with the refinement of the terms. I do have a better appreciation for why the adjustment in the terminology was made, and I think that the discussion around that was fruitful, even if I disagree with the fundamental premise of the move. I also think that the preamble is useful. I think it serves a purpose, and that the definitions included in the glossary and supporting documents are good as well. So, I'm really convicted on this, and I come from the biblical tradition of you have not because you ask not, and so to that end, I'd like to offer a substitute motion. Draft 4 of the North Carolina Social Studies Standards as presented in January 2021 with the addition of the preamble from our state superintendent and the inclusion of the definitions from DPI staff and the supporting documents.
Substitute motion by Mr. Ford to adopt the draft 4 standards that with the inclusion of the preamble and the requirement for approval of supporting documents. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Keenan.
Second by Mr. Keenan. Any questions or discussion on this substitute motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll on the substitute motion?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
No.
Ms. Kamnitz?
No.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
No.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
No.
Ms. White?
No.
Mr. Chastain?
No.
Mr. Ford? Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
No.
Lieutenant Governor?
No.
Vice Chair Duncan?
No.
Chair Davis?
No. Substitute motion fails. We're back to the main motion. Any other discussion on the main motion?
Mr. Chair.
Treasurer Falwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I listened to all the comments yesterday by the board members, and if my life depended on it, I really couldn't tell you who's Republican and who's Democrat on this board, because that's not something I focus on. What I focus on are what's in the best interest of the kids. I just want to say that, and I'm trying to bring a little levity into my remarks, but in no way are these meant to be humorous. There's a woman who went to the Taco Bell recently, and she ordered $100 worth of food. And the cashier said, "Will that be for here or to go?" And the lady looks at her and says, "Do you think that I'm going to eat all that sitting here?" And the cashier says, "I don't know your life." And the point is that people don't know my life, and in many, many instances, I don't know theirs. But if you've ever heard of Springfield Friends, if you ever heard of Alan J., then you'll know the Falwells. And the events of this week completely ignore the lives that many of us and our ancestors have led regarding many of these very volatile topics. And as I appreciate the tweet or the post yesterday regarding the condemnation of this depiction of me and others on this board, I personally do not think it went far enough, and we will be dealing with that, I presume, at some later point. but just a way of saying that in so many instances that we're in an environment right now where people just want to be affirmed, and no one wants to be informed. And I appreciate all the comments by all the board members yesterday, all heartfelt about what their journey has been on some of these more volatile topics, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment this afternoon.
Thank you, Treasurer. Any other discussion on the main motion? Lieutenant Governor.
I would just reiterate the comments that I made yesterday. For whatever reason, there are many North Carolinians that were not aware of these standards. Many. I know we talked about a number, 7,000, looked at them, and 85% of those 7,000 were in agreement with them. But again, I would say to you, in 4 days, we had contact with now over 30,000 people in North Carolina that are diametrically opposed to these standards. They have serious concerns about them. We are aware of that now. Moving forward with this is irresponsible. We need to go back to the drawing board. And I just reiterate that as a fact. For whatever reason, there are too many North Carolinians who weren't aware of this. They are now. We see it now. We see what a hot topic it is, what a divisive issue it is. It's still divisive with us. We need to go back to the drawing board again on it. And I urge you to go back to it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
No.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
No.
Mr. Chasteen?
No.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
No.
Lieutenant Governor?
No.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
The motion carries.
That concludes
Our action items for the day. That concludes today. I want to thank all staff and presenters for the February 4th, 2021 meeting and ask for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Ms. White. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chasteen?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
Motion carries. Adjourned.
Adjourned.
Be
Be
safe.
safe.